Well, that's what you want right there. I mean, just smooth as can be. Alright, well, I think that's it for today. We'll pick up with the Pistons tomorrow. It's tomorrow, which means that we get to put the Pistons into the block and finally have a completed rotating assembly. Before we put them in though, I want to clean them up, lube the wrist pins, and then we can drop them in. So I'm going to get right to that. I'm going to set up a little assembly line here, dirty, taking them apart, rod onto the wire wheel because you see they've gotten a little rusty sitting here. Yeah, I should have put some ATF on it, but I didn't really think about it, so but you know, it's fine. It'll come out nice on the wire wheel. And then lube the wrist pin, put it back together, set it down, cover it, move on to the next one. So this will take a bit of time, but it'll be worth it. And then we can finally drop them in the block. So let's get to it. All right, I guess we'll start with this one. This one is one of the ones that's kind of tight. So I'm gonna spray some WD-40 in here, in the wrist pin and in here just to get it a little smooth. Because I don't want to score anything, so just kind of spraying it in there, spray it on the other side. Alright, got my screwdriver here, and so when you're taking the wrist pin retainers out, there's a little notch here usually on your piston. You just stick anything in there that can get in there and pry it out. I'm gonna cover it here because I don't want it to go flying, but basically I'm just kind of prying it out around the edge. Still went flying. Oh, that's really gross. Alright, well, there it is. Alright, well, that'll get cleaned with some brake clean. WD-40 did its job, so now it's actually free to move around. So now what I did last time I did this was I kind of just set this down on a block of wood. I put, I think maybe like a 13 mil deep socket on there and just kind of hit it with the dead blow. So that's what I'm going to do again. So I'm actually going to end up using a 15, like so. Just start knocking it out. And there it goes. Alright, so it's coming out, but now I've kind of hit the point where I need to change my angle of attack here, so I'm just going to put it on its top like this. Didn't quite get it all the way out. Alright, now I've seen people say that the rod should have an arrow on it and the piston should have an arrow on it and this and that. I have not found those to point which way it should point in the block. I haven't seen that on any of these rods or pistons, so I'm going to take extra care to make sure that I put everything back the way it was. So I'm making sure that I know how everything was lined up before, taking everything and doing whatever with it. So I'm just going to keep that in mind as I go forward. All right, so my dad actually just gave me a grease pencil to use. So I marked this side of the rod and this side of the piston, and I'm just going to keep the wrist pin in until I'm ready to lube it, and then I can just take it out and put it right back in. So that should be okay. Now I'm going to take these pieces and put them on the wire wheel. I'm definitely not going to wire wheel the inside surface, I'm just gonna, get the rod a little cleaned up because it's a little rusty. So, yeah. Alright, now everything's gonna get a nice wipe and spray of brake clean, just to make sure everything's nice and clean and free of gunk. It's easy to know how the caps and the rods go together because they have tangs on them that go together. So you can see that these tangs here on the bottom go together, and then it's smooth on the top. So it just goes together like that. Beautiful. Now these are both going to get a dose of brake clean. That's nice and clean. The way I'm keeping track of which way this went in is there's numbers on one side and it's blank on the other side, so the numbers were facing out when it came out. Alright, and now it's time to lube up the wrist pins. So I'm going to put my lube glove back on. Okay. Lube. Well, it's a bit of a messy job, but it works. Now I'm just going to put my retainer back in. And kind of just got to force it in, push it in there, and then it's retaining. And now we've got piston ready to go. Alright, that is all the pistons cleaned, lubed, and ready to go. Next up is dragging the block out here and dropping the pistons in. Yeah, so I gotta check real quick which way the tangs go, because that's what's really important, and since I don't have any marks on any of these to show which way they should be pointing in the cylinders, I'm gonna have to figure it out myself based off of where the tanks should be. So let me check that out and bring the block out. Alright, so it looks like the tangs should be on this side. So if the front of the block is here, the tangs should be closer to me when I install them. And that makes sense because that's the side that the tangs were on for the main caps also, and main journals. So now that we know that, we can start putting stuff together. But I realized that these brace bolts are actually kind of loose. I think what happened was I tightened them first before the main bolts, and then once the main bolts got tightened down, these weren't quite as tight anymore because the braces got squished down a little bit. So I'm going to go back and tighten these back down to 30 Newton meters each, and then we'll go to the rods. That's good. Alright, so time to get these going. So I'm going to clean these up a bit each. I'm going to use a new rag. Yeah, rod journals. So now that the block has rotated over, the tangs, when they go in, should be on this side. So I gotta remember that. Oh no, that's like old coolant. Is that old dried up coolant? That was weird. So as I was rotating the block back over, I found this white stuff, and at first I thought it was sand that dried up from the black, like the jet washer thing, but I think that was actually really old coolant that got dehydrated, because as I was rubbing it together in my hands, it started to feel kind of like coolant. So that was interesting. But that is why you always clean your block, no matter what the machine shop says they did or whatever. You always just do a nice clean. I don't know how that got missed, but out here. Alright, well, that was weird. It looks like there was still a bunch of like dried up coolant stuck in the coolant jackets. So I blew that out with air, and a bunch of crap came out, which is crazy because I thought I, really did a number on that stuff and got all that stuff out of there, but I guess not. So there you go. That's I guess something to look for when you're doing this yourself. After doing all that though, everything's dirty again. So I'm gonna have to go through and wipe everything down clean with some brake clean and stuff like that, and just try to get everything nice and clean again. Um, luckily though, I mean, I was really just forcing air through the water jackets, so everything kind of just blew out like that, and when everything was blowing out, the block was upside down, so most of the stuff was, just shooting straight onto the ground. So really the cylinders and then the, rod journals on the crank are really the things that really need to get cleaned, and then just the rest of the stuff. So I don't think anything else should be too dirty. So let me just start wiping that down. Also, I mean, all that stuff was just like old dry coolant. It's not like it's, sand or dirt or grime. Well, grime is whatever, but, it's not like it's sand or dirt. So I don't think it's a huge deal. Still sucks, but, you know, whatever. But at least now I know all that stuff is not in there anymore, so I guess that's a plus. Alright, so before we drop the pistons in, I'm going to lube up the cylinder walls a little bit, but I'm not going to use engine lube because a lot of people said engine lube or assembly lube can slow the ring seating process. So I'm just going to wipe it down with ATF and then drop the pistons in there. So let me grab some of that. All right, now for the fun part. All right, so I've got my ring compressor tool. Shout out to what was his name? Shout out to Doomer17018 for telling me that he broke a ring using one of these before. Unfortunately, I'm doing this right now with this, so I'll try to be extra careful with it. You actually commented that last night, so thanks for the heads up. I'm gonna do it anyway. I'll just be very careful with it. So we'll see how it goes. I am gonna lube it up with some ATF though. I would assume that the way that it broke was it just like didn't grab well enough because they're cheap tools, and the ring ended up sitting on top of the block somehow, and then when it broke the ring. I would assume that's what happened. Not really on him if that happened to him. It's like the tool should work as advertised. There's not much you can do to get around that. But we'll see how it goes for mine. So we'll start with 6 because that's over here. I think I said this in the ring filing episode, but I'm really glad that Hastings has seen the light and used 3-piece oil control rings instead of BMW's stupid 1-piece design. So, because a lot of people, what they do is they get the M54 compression rings. they get the M54 compression rings, the first and second ring, and then use the M52 TU oil control ring. Some guy on eBay, I think, used to sell them, but I couldn't find that anywhere. So I don't know. It's cool that Hastings does it the right way and not the other way, and that it just comes as one complete thing. Alright, so I'm sure you've already heard this before, unless this is your first engine building episode you've seen ever, but you need to clock your piston rings. So this gap here and this gap all the way over here, they need to be not overlapping. The oil ring, I'm going to put those ones, since it's a 3-piece one, I'm going to put the top of the 3 of the oil scraper over one side of the wrist pin, the other one over the other side of the wrist pin. I don't think these ones matter as much, but I figured I would do it. And then for the second ring, I'm putting it over one skirt of the piston and the other ring on the other skirt of the piston. So it's, split into quarters here. Alright, cool. So now I'm going to drop these in. I forgot to put my rod bearing on here, so let me do that real quick. Alright, so when you're putting these bearings in, all these bearings are actually the same. So you can see on the tangs that they are identical between the cap and the rod, so it doesn't matter. So that's why you can have all the same bearing. It just kind of goes in mirrored onto the cap as it does the rod. So just like for the main bearings, you just push it in, line it up with the tang. Push it on there. Make sure it's flat and even. And now that one's ready to go. Tang is supposed to be on this side. So, dropping it down. All right. Alright, so I can see how that dude broke a ring with this thing, because this thing kind of sucks. I'm going to try it anyway and just see if I can... Hallelujah. Cool. Alright, so how did I do that? Well, so basically I just clamped this thing down as hard as I possibly could to the point where I thought I was going to break it. It was really tough getting that last click out of it, but I mean, I just had to crank down on it and make sure I got it. But yeah, that wasn't fun, and it's not going to be fun doing the rest of these, but I think this will work, and I think as long as you're nice and gentle with your pushing tool, I think it'll be okay. And yeah, evenly around the piston. So yeah.
Now, do you have to attach that one, or are you gonna keep installing them?
I'm gonna keep installing them. Let's see if I can get another click out of it. It never really was that round. Kind enough.
It's a great reveal when that.
Mm-hmm. No piston slap there. Oh, beautiful. Ooh. lose my hat. All right. So okay, so that one, the compression ring slipped out, and I'm glad I caught that before I broke it. So gotta go back and readjust here. Okay, so now is the time to plasti gauge. This is going to be a bit of a tedious process because I'm going to have to do it to each one individually. Actually, that's not true, I can do two at a time. I can do these two, and these two at the same time. I gotta wipe off the engine lube that's on there, assembly lube that's on there, and then plasti gauge. Alright, so this is cylinder 2 and 5 that we're looking at now. Alright, so to do the plasti gauge, I'm going to use the original rod bolts and then just torque those down to BMW spec. But I will be, for the final install, using ARP rod bolts. I don't want to stretch those and then have to take them out, so I'm going to use the OEM or the original ones for the measurement and then put the ARP ones in after. So, two things I need to find, rod bolt torque spec from BMW and clearance for the bearings. So, give me 1 second and I'll find those. Alright, so I just got back from lunch, and after thinking about it for a while, I think I'm just going to measure these two with the plasti gauge, and if they're good, then I'm going to assume the rest are good. The reason for that is the crank was never even machined, it was just, cleaned up. They're OEM rods that also weren't really touched, they're just cleaned, and they're high quality rod bearings. So if these two are good, I'm going to assume the rest are good, because the crank journals are definitely all within the same spec, and the rods are all definitely within the same spec. So the only thing that would be different between them is the bearings, and these are pretty good bearings. So I don't see any reason to check the rest of them. So I'm just gonna check these. I looked it up, and someone who had actually reached out to the dealership said that the way you torque them is, for the OEM ones, 5 Newton meters for assembly, 30 Newton meters for the first pass, and then 70 degrees. So similar to the main bearings, but a little bit different. So let me get my torque wrench out and we'll start going. Okay, it goes to 7 Newton meters. So I'm just gonna do that. Actually, yeah, well, yeah. I'm just gonna go to 7. And these are E12 bolts, these OEM ones. Actually ended up going to 8.2. I'm just gonna set it to 8.2 actually because, or 8, because I don't think we're gonna be able to get to 7. Alright, and now 70 degrees. Alright. Yeah, perfect, yeah. Alright, let's check. Thank you, 50s kids. So, clearance is supposed to be between 0.02 and 0.055. This one is close to 0.25. But this is also the one that was kind of weird. So, I'm happy with both of those. It's within the range. So, I'm gonna clean these off, and I'm just gonna trust that the other ones are within clearance. The clearances are within tolerance. So, yeah, that's it. So, clean this with the scraper and clean the caps with the scraper, and then start lubing stuff up and putting it together. That one came off really nicely. Pistons down a bit. Alright, so now you can pull this back up. As such, put that cap on with some lube. Slide that on with the tangs together. Alright, we'll leave that one for now. We'll come back with bolts. Push this one down. Let it fall to the side. Drip some from up here. Right onto the bearing. Rub it around. Rub it around. Put some on here. Line it up. Pull it. Nice. Grab cap number 2. Get some lube on it. Tangs together. On. Alright, cool. Now it's time to open up our rod bolts. When ARP sends you something, they send you this assembly loop with it. Definitely always use this. You put it on the threads and you put it at where the head is going to, or where the head of the bolt is going to sit. This prevents you from cracking things, so definitely always use it. It also helps you get a more accurate torque because you're not working with friction as much. You're just measuring the torque itself. So whatever. So starting with 5, I'm gonna put some goop on this one. So there's some of that on there. Alright, and now I'm going to put some on the head here. It actually kind of got sucked away there, so I'm going to put a little more just on the bolt itself. There we go, that's nice. Alright. I'm going to put some around the top of this one here. Like that. Drop it down. Alright, now I'm going to go to cylinder 2. Get that one nice. Lubed and ready. Alright, so I've got my first 2 rods and caps in with my new ARP rod bolts, and it's time to bust out the stretch gauge. And so for any bolt, what really matters is how much it stretches when you tighten it, but usually you can't measure that. So engineers come up with a torque that correlates to that amount of stretch and say, this is how much you need to torque it to with your torque wrench. But with rod bolts, we were fortunate enough to be able to measure both ends or grab both ends of the bolt when it's installed. So we'll be able to measure the stretch. And why it's so important to measure stretch for rod bolts also is because they see the most force out of any bolt in the motor, really. So that's where this tool comes in. And this is a stretch gauge. So the way it works is basically you just have these 2 locating pins, and they fit nicely onto a performance rod bolt because it's got dimples on both sides. And basically you fit it in like this, and it measures the length of the bolt. Well, not really. It measures a difference in the length of a bolt. So I have some reading right now with the big dial, and then say I tighten it down and it stretches just a little bit, and then I get a different reading. And that difference is what you measure as your stretch. So these bolts, when tightened down, according to ARP, should stretch to 7 thou to 7.5 thou. So that's a pretty tight tolerance on that, so it's going to be an interesting process. But yeah, so basically what's going to happen is I'm going to take a 0 of each of these bolts and then tighten them in increments. So ARP says if you don't have a stretch gauge, to tighten them to 36 foot-pounds. So my plan is to tighten each of them to 30 and then to 36, measure again, see where I'm at each of them, and then go from there, either loosening or tightening to get to the right stretch amount. So my process, since I want to be able to tighten them in increments, and I want to be able to tighten them kind of at the same time, I don't want to tighten one all the way and then tighten the other one all the way. I'm going to basically choose one of these four to be my arbitrary zeroed 0 point and take my first measurement. And I'll write that down on my piece of paper, which the first one I'm just gonna write down 0. But then I'm going to keep my dial where it is, so I'm not gonna reset the 0, and then go to each of these. And if it's slightly different, like maybe a thou off, then I'll write down a thou for that bolt. And then when I go back and stretch all of them, tighten them and check the stretch, I'll just subtract that number off for each of these to get my actual difference in stretch. So if that didn't make sense now, the whole process will be shown, so it should make sense by the end. All right, so first things first is I'm gonna set my 0 on this bolt here. So if you guys wanna come around here and take a look at what I'm gonna be doing here. All right, so I've got my stretch gauge here. The longer of the ticks indicate a thou, and then the shorter ones are half a thou. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 thou, 10 thou, 15 thou. And so, and this front dial here moves, and so this is how I'll set my 0. So I'm going to attach this here onto my rod bolt. I gotta find the dimple at the bottom. And you see it moves nice and free. And I'm already pretty close to 0 because we were messing with this. So right there. And I'm gonna tighten it. Okay. And so that's my 0. And so I'm gonna come over here with my clipboard. So you see here I've got my cylinder 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and then my front or my forward and back, or however you want to think about it, bolts. So I'm gonna write down 0 there. Whatever, not much to look at right now, but I'll go to the next one and I'll write that one down and we'll move forward. All right, so this one actually went backwards on the gauge. So this one's at negative half a thou. So I'm gonna come here, right here, and write negative 0.5. So negative half a thou. My handwriting's pretty bad, but that's what you get. Come to the next one. That one's actually pretty right on 0. 0. Make sure it's in the dimple. All right. All right, so now it's time to start tightening. I'm gonna get my torque wrench out and set it to, I'm gonna go 18 foot-pounds. Actually, I'm going to 25.
Okay.
I've kind of just arbitrarily decided that. Okay, and these are also not E12s like the other ones. These are E16s. I'm gonna go to 25 foot-pounds. Alright, so that's 25 foot-pounds. And I'm actually just curious how much it's stretched on just 25 foot-pounds. So I'm gonna put it on real quick. Wow. Okay, so we're already at just about 4.5 thou of stretch. That's pretty amazing to me, actually, that just that little amount of torque can stretch the bolt that much. So I'm gonna go to 30 next and see how much that does, and then if it's still not enough, then I'll go to 36. But fact that 25 brought it up to 4.5 thou, which actually, I guess that does make sense. No, I'll go to the 36. All right, so that is 36 foot-pounds. Now we're gonna check the stretch. Let's take a look. So that puts us right at the 7.5 thou mark. I think I might try backing off just a little bit, see if I can get it real nice and perfect inside of the 7 to 7.5 mark. So let me grab a large bar, see if I can back it off just a smidge. Get right in the 7 to 7.5 thou mark. I've got my long bar here with my E16 on it, and I'm just gonna try to back this off just a hair and see where that gets us. All right, so I mean that was, you know, just the tiniest little turn. We're talking about, you know, within half a thou. So any amount of change is going to be a lot. Wow, and that was enough to bring us back down to around 5 thou. So that's crazy. So if I see any more in the 7, like if I see another one at 7.5 thou, I'm just gonna leave it there. Tighten this up a little bit more. All right, that wasn't enough. All right, we're approaching. That actually put us like right just over 7 thou, but under 7.5. So happy about that one. But again, I mean, if I tighten the next one to 36 foot-pounds and it comes at exactly dead on 7.5 or dead on 7, I'm not gonna mess with it. ARP does say between 7 and 7.5, and the amount that I was moving that, there's no way I could accurately replicate, you know, just that tiniest little movement. So I think it's better to just stick with it if it's at 7 or 7.5 at the boundaries. So that's at 6.5 away from 0, but remember this one was half a thou on the shorter side. So if we do 6.5 minus -0.5, we actually end up at 7 thou. So this one's actually pretty dead on. I know I said I wouldn't do this, but I think I'm gonna try tightening it just a little bit, just the tiniest bit, and we'll see. Maybe I can refine my skills here. All right, I put just the tiniest bit of movement on that. All right, that put me dead on 6.5, so that should be dead on 7, and I'm happy about that. So we're good. All Alright, I'm happy with that. That's just over 12.5, so that should put us just over 7 with our offset. So there you go. That's a completed rotating assembly. Let me turn it over. I'm going to put a little dribble of ATF into each cylinder and then turn it. So I'm just trying to coat the cylinder walls with some ATF so it's nice and lubed up. Now I'm gonna spin it, turn it over a bit, make sure everything feels good and nice and smooth. Well, that's just lovely. I could do that all day. Gotta get a video for my friends. Alright, so before I close things off, I just want to do a quick recap of, tools, parts, stuff like that. Tell you what I did, what I would have done differently, and all that. So, first off, this thing sucks. You have to hold down on it really hard to make sure that that the rings don't slip out. That happened to me a couple times. The rings popped out and I had to reset and all this stuff. So using this thing sucks. I didn't break any rings. I didn't do any hopefully permanent or detrimental damage, but when I do this again, I'm gonna invest in the proper tool, the proper sized 84 millimeter, sleeve to put the pistons into. Other than that, though, all the other tools I have worked great. The stretch gauge was great. The torque wrench did everything I needed. No more, no less. I think this was honestly a great value for what I got out of it. The amount of engine assembly lube I got was more than enough. As you can probably see there, I only used that much and got the whole bottom end assembled, and really no problems worrying about running out. And I used plenty, so that's all good. All the parts I used, no complaints there. The bearings were all great. Except for the Glyco ones that had the nicks in it, but whatever, they're fine. So yeah, overall it was a pretty simple process. Just make sure you do things properly. Use a stretch gauge, use an angle torque wrench, double, triple check things, write stuff down, and you'll be fine doing this yourself. Yeah, so thanks for watching. I don't know exactly what's going to be in the next episode. I'm guessing it's going to be timing components and then maybe oil pump and stuff like that. But I think there's a couple things I want to do the oil pump before it goes on, take it apart, clean it, and stuff like that. So yeah, I'll see you next episode. Thanks. I think that was pretty good. So, oh my god, she's here. Sorry. Start dropping them in. Hey.
Maybe it's too cold.
Homemade Gatorade. What?
Yeah, maybe it's too cold.
Oh, that's great.
Oh,
It can be a little distant to some people.
You're not kidding.